So we have obviously been part of we have obviously been part of conversations where people don't think that they need a training plan or a training coach. But the reality is that even as active duty operators, we still have training plans. We still have training coaches. But if you're not already in and as an operator in special tactics, where do you go? Trent, where do you go?
I go to my man, Kevin Edgerton. He runs 18 Alpha Fitness. He's been through a few different selection courses and worked in a few different selection courses. I've personally seen the results of his work in the Air Force selection process, and his results are amazing. So not only has he been through the courses and knows what he's doing, but he also has all the credentials to back it up. So he's very educated, and he's a person I trust, not just with me, but with my family when it comes to fitness and recovery and all those other types of things. And also, I think jiu-jitsu as well, right, Aaron? I think you're the jiu-jitsu guy.
He is.
Has Kevin ever hurt you?
Well, he actually has. Kevin and I have rolled together, so that's the great thing about Kevin, right? Is he literally practices what he preaches. He's out there, he's testing all of his programs, he's working out. If he's not video coaching and he's not doing something by distance, man, he is down in the trenches still. And that guy has had a long career. He's a 20-year special forces guy. Ended up being a strength and conditioning coach, and now here he is with standardized plans for everybody. Like, hey, if you want to go to special forces, he's got that base framework, but he does individualized plans and does individualized coaching for you as well. So it's not just something you're going to buy and he says, hey, you're off and you're on your way. He's engaged literally from the start of your journey all the way to the end. He's got a great track record with getting people ready for assessment selection. And like I said, man, there's nothing better than somebody that's actually doing the things that you're doing as well and seeing some success from. So head on over to 18alphafitness.com. That's 18alphafitness.com. You can find his entire website. You can also find him on Instagram at 18alphafitness. It's the easiest way. Just hit him up. Use our code ONEREADY. You can hit Kevin up direct on the DMs, and that'll get you a discount. And once again, 18alphafitness.com. If you want to get ready and you want to get into the pipeline, whatever that pipeline is, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Kevin can get you there, and he's got the experience to do so. So go check him out, 18 Alpha Fitness.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the One's Ready podcast. We are back for round 2. It's Trent and I, and then we have the legendary Chief Mike Lampe. Now, this is part 2, and just to recap what Chief had hit on beforehand, we've gone through kind of his experiences with the pipeline, and then we moved on to Project 404, and then really some kind of story time, if you will, fireside chats in terms of, we're talking about Chief Lampe doing loading and unloading bombs, being an EOD tech, really, and with a bunch of agency guys betting on whether or not they were actually going to survive and be blown up. And now, Chief, we really want to welcome you back to the podcast and then kind of give you a jumping off point. You start wherever you want, really, because we're just here to listen. But if you want to start off with Brand X, we can go that route if you want. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Reach. I think where I'll just start is kind of wrap up with the Project 404. And I think I mentioned on the last podcast that was really a, educational, really provided me a ton of experience and tools in my tool bag that I would never have been able to obtain if I hadn't been chosen and had the good fortune to deploy over there. From learning about loading bombs to basically taxiing T-28s to learning how to fly an O-1, when we were able to hitch a ride back to Vinchin, where the Raven Fax would basically give us the basic on flying, and kind of they'd go to sleep, and myself and Charlie Gay, who was a maintenance rep most of the time, and we got to do that a half dozen times. But what an experience, that learn the basics of flying and get to fly an O-1 Fac, from Longchin back into the Vinchin airspace. Learned a lot about airstrikes, resupply, all hands-on, all operational. So a great, 6-8 months experience for me. I returned from there January of 73. Returned back to Hurlburt. And as soon as I got back, I had crossed paths with some of the combat controllers that were stationed at Udorn, Thailand, Det 1 56 South CCT. And, I really wanted to get back and be part of that team. And so there was a guy on the team, Staff Sergeant Jackie Harden, I think he was Tech Sergeant then, that, that was kind of a mentor to me and others, some of the young troops. And Jackie sat down with me and, talked about, how my experiences 404 went, what I learned, et cetera. And I said, I'd really like to get back to Thailand. I'd like to get to Det 1 56 Sal, CCT, because they were doing some unique stuff. I crossed paths with them up in Longchin, and they were running a project which was the F8 or F. I'll think of the aircraft beacon bombing program, and so they had the PPP-18 beacons, and they would come up and they would set up, I think it was Red Dog control, if my memory serves me correctly, and then they would go out. The agency would insert them in on the hilltops, with the beacon and the BPE 451 battery, so the aircraft could hone in on those beacons and do bombing runs. And so I found that intriguing. And plus, they were running what they called back then as a forward air guide school. And that was for the Laos and Maos and the Thai volunteers that worked for the agency. So they had basically a hell of a training program teaching the foreign nationals how to put in airstrikes. And actually, once they graduated from that course, they went up and were assigned to different, units, for lack of a term, or companies in northern Laos, and worked airstrikes for all the indigenous. And so that intrigued me. So Jackie had some points of contact at Personnel Center, and he pulled some strings for me. Hard to believe. And before I knew it, I had orders to Thailand, and I think I showed up there in September of '73. Now, the effort that team had been doing up in Laos, reference the beacon bombing program, obviously had come to a halt because of all the peace talks and everything that was going on at that time, reference to bring the war. But they were still running, the forward air guide school. So it was quite an education for me. But I also was able to relate back to my experiences of doing a little backseat stuff, not to say it was legal, with the Ravens, and how they were putting airstrikes and how things looked from where, a Raven fact or an OV-10 fact would see the terrain. So I was able to apply that experience, to becoming qualified to be a forward air guide instructor and teach the foreign nationals. But shortly, I think it probably happened in January '74 over there, that Det 1 56 Sal all of a sudden became USMACTHAI. And that was a training detachment now. And they brought, probably back in the history books there, Colonel Adderholt, Tiny Adderholt. And they promoted him to Brigadier General, and they brought him back on active duty. And he headed up USMACTHAI. And all of a sudden, our mission focus changed from the Laos and the Thai volunteers and the Mao to the Cambodians. And so across the spectrum there at the detachment, USMACTHAI detachment, the T-28 pilots were now training the Cambodians. The Raven Facts now were running a fact school and flying school for the Cambodians. And then we, the CCT team, which was a small detachment. I think there was about 6, 8. It fluctuated. We didn't have more than 12 guys at any one given time there. We basically retooled the Forward Air Guide School for the Cambodian operation. At the same time, they were running a airdrop school. The C-123 pilots there, I think they brought in 3 or 4 C-123s with qualified C-123 pilots, and they were coming up with a high altitude CDS drop process, and kind of put what I call a bomber's sight up by the firewall, and started teaching them how to drop CDS bundles from high altitude. Well, there was no aerial delivery people assigned there at Udorn, so we ended up becoming aerial port or aerial delivery. So we had the responsibility, besides running the Forward Air Guide School, now we're rigging CDS bundles and packing the G11, G12 cargo parachutes. And then when that program got going, part of us were running the Forward Air Guide School. The other part would be flowing down to Nampong, which had been a previous fighter base for the Marines about 80 miles south of Udorn. And that's where we ran that airfield for all the pilots training, the O1 pilots, the T-28 pilots, on all their landings and takeoffs and all that stuff. We ran that airfield. So now, besides running the airfield for the students of the O1s and the T-28 pilots, at the same time, we're running the drop zone. And then part of the responsibility is try to recover all the CDS bundles and the parachutes. And then the 123 that dropped them would, would land, and then we'd have to upload all those parachutes and 55-gallon drums and the container system. And then that would be flown back to Udorn, and then, part of us would be waiting to receive it and start re-rigging the bundles. So that was an interesting, and again, another career broadening experience of, rigging CDS bundles, again, training the Cambodians to Forward Air Guide Strike, running the Nampong airfield. And then the colonel of the detachment, I think it was Colonel Tom Deacon, if I remember correctly, approached us about, running a small survival type program for the pilots, primarily focused on E&E and, recovery, where, the hoist and, came into place, because obviously the previous pilots hadn't been trained on that, and they weren't having much of a success of recovering some of the pilots that ended up getting shot down. So we put together a 3-day program, and it was pretty basic E&E, but, kind of focused on, getting ejected from your T-28 in the Yankee seat, or if you didn't have a Yankee seat, how you bail out and, activate your parachute, those type things, which you're familiar with from what's taught at survival school. So we implemented that. And then some of the helicopters down there in Cambodia really didn't have a hoist system. A lot of times they would have a rope, or they had have a bunch of straps trying to recover. So we came up with a basic technique of teaching them, if the rope, got down, if the rope was long enough, for lack of name, or the helicopter was low enough, then, how do you secure yourself with that rope? And so we just taught them, take the rope, put it around your waist, and then tie a bowline, over, under, and back through, boom. And we ran that. And then the 20th SOS 53s came up one day of that program and we ran vector training and ran hoist training from those guys. So that continued until, the dominoes started to fall in Southeast Asia, with Laos, and Cambodia and Vietnam. The sequence is a little bit different. I'm sorry, I don't have it all in order, but I think the first one that we operated on was Laos was basically falling. And a guy named Jerry Daniels, he was codename Hog. He was the agency rep for General Vang Pao. And of course, General Vang Pao had, pretty much ran the war zone or the war up there with the Hills Tribesmen, the Thai volunteers. He basically operated for the agency to prosecute that war. So Jerry came down to our hooch there in Udorn and came in, and we knew him. I worked with him when I was on 404, but some of the team members, John Korn, Mitch Bryan, Rex Evitz, also knew him. And he says, "Look, I gotta run a, evac of General Vang Pao and all as many people we can get out of Longchen, because the North Vietnamese, the Pathalao are closing in on Longchen, or, things are going to hell in a handbasket." So, he said, okay. And he says, "I've already coordinated with your commander." And so our part of that operation, he didn't need us to go up to Longchen to assist with their operations. What he needed us to do is go to Nampong and set up that airfield to receive all the different aircraft coming in with General Vang Pao and his people. So I think it was myself and JK and Mitch Bryan and Rex Evitz deployed down there, and it was strictly all-night operations, and pretty much limited lighting. And of course, the embassy and the agency had representatives down there. So of course, the weather during that time frame wasn't necessarily what you consider cooperative. A lot of wind, a lot of rain, et cetera. But we got the airfield set up. The other thing is, we had to set up what's called an NDB beacon, in TRN 25, I think it was, and that was quite the chore. It's the base is like R2D2, from Star Wars, and then you got a 50-foot antenna that you got to erect and put on that base, and then of course secure it. So that became one of the biggest challenges. So the evacuation started, and we were receiving, I think we had one or two C-46s, a C-47, and I think what we called the Gray Ghost back then, a C-130 that the agency used. And so that evacuation took 3 nights. And the visibility sometimes was just horrid. So what we'd have to do is take the Jeep, put it on center line to show it out. The aircraft would come in over the NDB beacon, and then, we had built an approach, past that to them. So they'd come in, and a few times we had to take gasoline and put it on, run it down the sides of the runway and light it, just because the beanbag lights that we had, or Alka lights at the time, just weren't sufficient for the aircraft to acquire their airfield. So eventually, I think we brought in, I'll roughly say 2,500, maybe 3,500 individuals from Longchen, General Vang Pao and his people. So that took a 3-night operation. We came back from that operation, and then things are kind of falling apart in Cambodia. And of course, things aren't going real well in Vietnam. So one of the things we ended up having, the students were training, actually, they started putting out concertina wire because these students wanted to get back to Cambodia to be with their families, and boom. And that was a kind of an interesting time, just trying to control the Cambodian students. And you could understand, hey, they want to get back, take care of their family, do what they can. And, we're basically kind of holding them, no, we can't do that, based on guidance from wherever. And then the next thing happened is the pending fall of, Vietnam. And then I think myself, and it was Rex Evitz, got deployed down. We loaded up on a 123. We got deployed down to a place called Trat, T-R-A-T, Thailand. And it kind of is strategically positioned there on the borders, Vietnam and Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, etc. And, our job was to take a soccer field and turn it into an airfield. So the 123 landed us, on the soccer field, kind of disrupted a ongoing soccer game that the Thais had with the the local monastery, and of course that didn't help with making friends and influencing people, as you can kind of imagine. But we sorted it out through the head monk during the process of the 123. After dropping off us at the front end of the soccer field, went down at the end, ended up getting stuck. So we ended up having to, barter, with the local farmers to get, buffalo, oxens to help, pull out the nose wheel of the 123. So finally got that 123 out of there, got it off, and then again, we're setting up an airfield in the middle of this province and Trot, and then we had the NDB beacon again, the TRN-25 set up, at a frequency which was passed to the South Vietnamese and I guess the Americans that were evacuating from Saigon or in the surrounding area. Saigon was about, Tan Shanut, I think it was, as the bird flies, about 200 miles. So, in a way it was pretty good, not a long jaunt for them. And I can't remember exactly the day. It was the end of April, probably the 30th, 29th of April, 75, all of a sudden. And of course, our frequency has been passed, but in some cases there was no comms. But what we had done is put out the VS-17 pot things. When we saw an aircraft approach, that we'd pop smoke to help them acquire the soccer field and eventually acquire what we set up as what we considered the best portion of the soccer field for the landing zone. and they started coming in. I think the first bunch of aircraft we received was like the O1, the Raven Fact O1 aircraft. And what the Vietnamese had done is they'd torn out the back seat and just stacked people in there, as many as they could. I think the first O1 we landed, I think by the time we finished offloading it, I think we had a dozen people come out of that O1. They just must have stacked themselves up to the ceiling, and the pilot must have had two people he was sitting on to fly it. It was just, and that just continued to be the case. And then we started receiving Huey helicopters, and they were packed to the gill. I swear that the first Huey that came in, I mean, it was coming in right at treetop level, and then you could hear the engine just struggling to try to stay airborne. And it finally kind of just did, what I call an auto rotation landing. And there had to be, and I'm not exaggerating, at least 30, maybe 40 people stacked in that when they opened up the doors. It just spilled out. And so we ran that operation. I think we ended up running it for 3 days, 3 days, 3 nights. We didn't receive any aircraft at night that I recall. We did have an F-5 aircraft come into trot. Obviously, landing on a soccer field wasn't conducive for that type of aircraft, so it ended up landing itself on the highway. And that call is quite ruckus, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, an F-5 has no business landing on a highway.
and so of course you're working with the Thai police, and of course my Thai wasn't very good. Thank goodness we had someone from the embassy that spoke fluent Thai. That we were eventually able to get the F-5 off the main highway, where all the buses and jeeps and you name it, were not happy campers. And I can't remember where we parked it or whatever. It probably went up to one of the bus stops or whatever. But then, we came back off that operation, and then we received a notification that the detachment, USMACTHAI, was being training detachment was being closed down, and of course, Rex and I had just gotten back. Mitch and John and other guys had been pretty much, packing things up, palletizing things, and we just decided, we didn't have any guidance, so the closest team to us was the team in the Clark Air Base, the Philippines. So, everything that we had, all the PPN 18 beacons, batteries, you name it, we just palletized everything that we had, just cleaned out the hooch, which was building 1510, and palletized. Next thing we all started receiving orders, or were notified where we're going. And I mean, I'm talking within, from us coming back from trot to the time we were climbing on the C-130 with our pallets and stuff, was probably 2 weeks at that, or less. And then we showed up, myself, John Korn and Mitch Bryan all got orders to Clark, and then Rex Evitz got orders to the TACP unit in Fort Lewis, because back then the 304s, were assigned to combat control teams, and we're combat controllers, but a lot of time the Air Force would assign them as a 304 to TACP. So Rex didn't get assigned to the McCord team at the time. He got assigned to the TACP unit. And I think a couple of the other guys, same thing. I think we had a young troop, Mike Brown at that time, Stu Pressey. I think Stu Pressey got reassigned to Pope Air Force Base, and Mike Brown was the 304, got assigned to, I think, a TACP unit in Shaw Air Force Base, to my memory. And there was a couple other movements, but it's been such a long time I can't recall. So we show up in Clark Air Base, and and again, that team had the Lou Brabham, J.D. Birch, John LeBeau, and I think Tom Fagan were the 4 that got deployed into Saigon and ran that part of the evacuation of Saigon during that time. And they did some outstanding stuff, some heroic stuff. And if I recall, all 4 were awarded the Silver Star for their actions during that evacuation of Saigon. And so I was stationed there at Clark Air Base from, I think, May of 1975 until November of, or October, November 79. And again, that was, again, another, enlightening, educational assignment, different mission set. The focus for that team was a lot focused on Korea at the time. So that's where I learned a lot about drop zone and landing zone surveys is in Korea. Always part of a survey team, going to survey the Suwon Highway, different places up on the DMZ. We had a place up there we called Ice Cream Drop Zone, because when we were up there surveying, if there was a Korean out there, believe it or not, selling ice cream.
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Yeah. And, spent many months up there, operating from Daegu all the way up Sokcho. Spent a lot of time up at Camp Casey with the 2nd Infantry Division. Just, dealing with a lot of contingency operations, I would call it, and, different exercises. Spent a lot of time on, which I think is still an exercise, team spirit, working with the ROC Special Forces, during that exercise through those years. At the same time, we had a pretty aggressive dive program and Halo program at Clark. We had a lot of highly qualified guys. And during that time frame, CCT was having trouble getting dive slots. And it's during this time frame that we'll call project recognition, which actually is the start of Brand X. And one of the prerequisites that Coach Carney wanted the Brand X team is to have his individuals do qualify. And so we ended up, the Clark team got tasked to come back to States to run a dive program or dive school, 3-week, boom. So Johnny Hall was the senior dive instructor there at Clark. He had a lot of experience. And then I think there was J.D. Birch, Tom Fagan, and then they chose me also to go back as part of the instructor cadre. And so we ran a portion of that program at Charleston Air Force Base, pretty much, the first couple weeks of it, the pool training, pool harassment, all the academics, et cetera. And then we flew down from Charleston with all the students, which Coach Carney was one, Mitch Bryan, John Corin, was it David Wilson, Pete Holt, guys like that. Again, I've kind of lost track of everybody that we trained that was part of, or Coach Carney was looking at to be part of the Brand X team. And then we finished out all the dive training down at Key Largo. All the compass swims, the deep dives, all that. And then we came back there, and that's, I knew Coach Carney pretty much as, Major Carney, Captain Carney, promoted to Major, just in a student thing. And then and that's when, he approached me. I didn't know Brand X from Adam or what Brand X was. And they were having a graduation party, and, Coach Carney kind of pulled me off the side and said, hey, John Corn, Mitch Bryan, these guys speak highly of you, and, recommended I talk to you about Brand X. And I said, what the F is Brand X, sir? Please explain. It's kind of a special program where we're going to be working with some of the Army, of course, Delta. If you didn't say Delta at the time, we got a special Army unit that we're going to be interfacing with, and and they kind of alluded, kind of be counter-terrorist stuff, and of course there at the Philippines, we had been, on this exercise with the SEALs and at Subic, and it was all pretty much focused on counter-terrorists, and a lot of the stuff focused on, the Entebbe raid that the Israels had done. And so we used QB Airfield. I know I'm digressing a little, as like Entebbe Airfield, and where we had the air operation piece, and of course the SEALs, and the New Zealand and Australian SAS were part of that training program, along with the Filipino, called Special Forces. So that just kind of reflecting back on those experiences, I kind of piqued my interest. And I said, well, Coach, the problem is I've already got an assignment. I applied for a consecutive overseas assignment. And he said, where to? I said, Germany. And, to the 7th SOS Special Operations thing, because I said I'd really like to stay overseas. I'd like to go to Germany because my wife's family is in France. Teresa, my wife, her father was in the French military, and of course, she escaped from Laos along with her family, a lot of her family, prior to the fall of Vientiane, the capital of Laos, and were able to get to France. And because of her father's status with the French military, they became full French citizens over there. And I said, so I'd kind of like to reconnect, Teresa with her family. And he said, well, okay, understand, and and so it's kind of the last part of October. I'm already out processing. We're over at the BOQ or transit quarters. We got my young son. He's 2 years old, and Teresa is pregnant with my second son, Travis. And I get this call. When I get a call, I get someone knocking on the door. It's from CBPO, Consolidated. Boom. Hey, you text Sergeant Lampe? And I said, yeah. He says, I'm supposed to give you this. I said, what is it? Well, it's a new set of orders. I said, what? I said, what? I said, I got orders. Rhein-Main, Germany, 7th SOS, Combat Control Team. I'm sorry. Yeah, you got new orders. Charleston Air Force Base, 437th Military Airlift Wing, Combat Control Team. And, so I said, who do I talk to about this? So you can go talk to the chief at CBPO. So, okay, it's a short walk, short jog. So I jog over to CBPO. Interesting thing is this chief, this is ironic. The chief of CBPO was my first supervisor in the Philippines when I was assigned to the Philippines as an admin troop. And so I walk in, Chief McCall, I said, Chief, he says, hey, Reverend Lampe. Well, he said, well, text Sergeant Lampe. Yeah, he said, well, I said, can you explain this to me? And he says, look, some guy named Major Carney, in 21st Air Force or whatever? I said, yeah, I was I was one of his scuba instructors, a while back. Well, he has basically got you reassigned to Charleston Air Force Base, and that's been concurred with the 2-star general at 21st Air Force, which was General Sadler at the time, who Coach Carney worked for, and who had basically, recommend Coach Carney head up the Project Recognition, now what we call Brand X. And I said, he said, is there any way to get out of this? I explained to Chief, hey, my wife was really looking forward to go to Germany, and well, hey, orders are orders, Sergeant. Go back and break the news.
You make someone else explain it to my wife then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go tell her. I don't want to tell her.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine how that went. It was like a turd in a punch bowl.
Yep.
and so the fast forward, okay, I got new orders, climb on the whatever hell birds they were flying us out of there, and flew back, states. I spent a little time up in Washington State, with my parents, and then Teresa and I, traveled across the states, and I think we signed in to Charleston Air Force Base on 1 November 1979. Checked into quarters. Coach Carney wasn't on board. They were out, I think it was at Warrenburg Maxim at the time in North Carolina. Out there's an airfield. And actually doing, I think, the last validation exercise to certify SFOD Delta as U.S.'s counterterrorist force. So I think they wrapped that up on the 3rd of November. The coach came back and they came over to quarters, and, not sure it got a real warm welcome from Teresa, but
you don't say.
I don't mean to laugh, but it all worked out. And so the next day, I'm trying to figure out where we're going to live, get out of BOQ. And what happens, 4 November, the embassy falls, the hostages are taken. And then, it's utter chaos. What's going on, with the Brand X team. Now, the Brand X team now is Coach Carney, Mitch Bryan is the NCOIC, John Corn, David Wilson, Pete Holt, myself, and then, picked up Dick West, who was over in the Philippines with us. So that kind of made the, for lack of term, what's called the core Brand X team at Charleston at the time. And understand, they assigned Coach Carney there as the OIC to the Charleston team. And of course, all of us were the Charleston team. But in actuality, we were, for lack of term, segregated. I don't mean that in a negative term. We had the back portion of that building that we operated on. And we really had no, we did a little bit of support for the 437th Military Airlift Wing, which was all 41s at the time. But again, our focus, as soon as I got there, was all focused up at Bragg and interfacing with SFOD, and of course down at Hurlburt with the MC community. And so, we went through a ton of, gyrations, references. I finally got the family settled in, went on a couple, and you got to understand that, this was for lack of term, probably the most cohesive organization at the time was SFOD Delta. They were pretty much an established organization. We had just kind of come together Brand X. Now, again, granted, we all pretty much knew each other. And if you look at the original Brand X and the guys that went into Desert One, we'd all served in Southeast Asia together. So we had, we kind of knew each other's moves on the dance floor. So when you look at the guys that went into Desert One, Coach Carney, was our OIC, our leader. And then we had picked up Rex Wallman out of Hurlburt, and that was tied to, interfacing with the gunships, and he had been working with the gunship contingent plans and stuff. But everybody else that was there, myself, Mitch, John, and Bud Gonzalez was part of that, and Dick West, we'd all served in, Thailand together, served in the Philippines together. So we were, for lack of a term, cohesive in that manner. And I guess the thing on the Iranian thing, the way things played out, is every, JCS kind of wanted to make this what you got to call it, a joint operation, make sure each of the services had a piece of the action per se. And so it didn't, what can I say, even look like anything that you see today or what, came about after the hallway commission. So it's, I just use the term, and I don't mean it disrespectfully. It was kind of a pickup team, and tactics and techniques, were being developed as you're rehearsing. The other thing, people kind of lose sight of is the Air Force and the Army, and all services were pretty much going through the motion of downsizing or eliminate special ops capability. They were getting ready to send all the AC-130 gunships, if I recall, to the reserves at that time. There was only a small amount of MC-130s. There was a few there at Hurlburt. There was a few in Okinawa at the 1st SOS and a few at the 7th SOS. So they had to pool from all these organizations to have enough sufficient airlift to do. And then, of course, you probably know by history, a decision was made to utilize the Sea Stallion 53s, which were minesweepers, the Navy 53s. And to my understanding, the reason for that is they didn't want to use your normal HH-53s or your rescue 53s because they would stand out, on a carrier, or if they're operating over in that AO. So they elected to, set aside, I think it was nine Sea Stallions on the Nimitz, if I got my ships or aircraft carriers correct, and maintain them out there. And then they chose, Navy and Marine crew members to be the pilots. Obviously, they had Sea Stallions that probably came out of San Diego and North Island that were part of the initial train-up. And, no disrespect to those pilots, but it takes a different breed or different training to fly the low level in NVG and go into, austere conditions. And I would say we probably went through a couple crews. And again, we were rehearsing all kinds of different scenarios. One time we're dropping air blivet fuel from 141s, and we had dropped prior with mules and things like that to try to recover them and then try to refuel set up FARP stations out in the middle of the desert, and that necessarily didn't go well. And so we kind of went away from that program. Same time, we're running we'll call airfield seizure type operations in Indian Springs with the Charlie Company of the 1st 75th. I think Sherm Williford was the commander, and the company commander at the time was Captain Dave Grange. The folks that were operating, and also we were operating with the agency folks that were developing the lights that eventually Coach Carney, flew in on the agency birds and implanted them. So I guess what I'm trying to articulate, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, is envision that, this rehearsal to go do Operation Eagle Claw really never went to a full dress rehearsal, if that makes sense. We were rehearsing, practicing, exploring different, what I call different, options to do what they wanted us to do. I think the most stable process in the whole rehearsal was Deltas, reference the embassy, the chancellor's house, all that stuff. That was pretty much locked in stone. So they had, as far as I'm concerned, they had all their T's crossed and all their I's dotted. And I think, where we fit in, we always seem to be in somewhat of a parochial battle, I guess is a polite way to put it. And I think a good example is that there's one, operation that we're going to go seize Indian Springs, was one of the options. We'd fly into Indian Springs, the MCs, et cetera, the Rangers, CCT, all that stuff, hook up. But Mitch Bryan or I down there to run that operation. And I think this was January 80. Yeah, sorry about that. And, so we're in the briefing room, and there's always the push. We got to get more shooters. We got to put more shooters. Got to put more Rangers on the airplane, et cetera. And so, Mitch and I are sitting in the briefing, and, we got the responsibility for the TACAN and, what do you call it? Air operations portion of the, seizure at Indian Springs. And, no disrespect to any of those fine gentlemen, but they made a decision that Mitch and I weren't needed. And said, nope, so want you to teach Private Snuffy over here, Ranger Snuffy, no disrespect. I got the most respect for the Rangers, but they, train him up on, how to set up the TACAN and, all that stuff that we were supposed to do. We're training up a couple, Rangers to do what Mitch and I were supposed to do. And we did the best we could in the short amount of time that we had. But that decision, the Ranger Battalion Commander and, Sherm Williford, which, and Captain Grange decided they needed more Rangers. And I think it was Colonel Wicker, the Air Force Component Commander, said, okay, and he's the one that told us to train these guys up. So at the same time, Coach Carney had flown out there with the commanding general and the J3 of JCS, 3-star General Gass. They were going to observe and watch this, operation, observe where we're at in executing the rescue plan. so after we did our part, hey, we went down by Bacon by the Sea, and we had quite a few beers.
Be good.
And we had the ass. So we finally came back, hit the rack. Next thing I know, the building office is pounding on our door. Hey, Sergeant Lampe, Sergeant Bryant, wake up. Okay, we're awake. What? You need to come over to the office, take this call from this irate major. What? Okay, maybe you wasn't irate, but went over there. There's Coach Carney. And he said, "What the hell were you guys doing? That was Hey, Coach, we didn't go. They took us off the mish." I have to tell you, Coach, that I'm sorry we didn't have any way to get a hold of you, but they elected for us to train up a couple Rangers the best we could to do what we were supposed to do. We had nothing to do with that, whatever took place. And I guess it just turned into quite a cluster. And they finally basically stopped the op and sent all the airplanes home. And the next thing I know, they have a meeting up at Fort Bragg. And this is a watershed event for Brand X, in my humble opinion. And General Gass, brought all the commanders in, and Coach Carney was there. We're still at Hurlburt, but obviously they kind of covered what the hell went wrong. And General Gass got up and said, "Listen, from this point on, airmanship will be done by airmen." Is that clear? Boom. I guess you could hear a pin drop. So, moving forward, we got to do airmanship.
It's interesting because history repeats itself. I know that there's been several operations where space or weight was limited or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, we got to cut some stuff." And though we were never cut, history just repeats itself because, look at we're downsizing now. The entire DOD is kind of downsizing, especially, Air Force Special Operations. And you're kind of like, well, you would hope that we have learned from the past, but we really haven't.
No. It seems like, I'll just say generationally, if you don't read history, you're doomed to repeat it. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned if people would just take time and look back and reflect. From my perspective, there's a lot to be learned. And so yeah, you kind of scratch your heads on that. Is why. And that, to me, that's a great example of what we call Air Force Special Tactics has gone through ever since the stand-up of Brand X, that we're always fighting for, as we used to tell Coach, get us in. Coach, get us in, get us on the playing field. We'll do the rest. Show them, we're always in. I don't know if it's the case anymore, but I think you guys have really, established, you've got a hell of one anchor point, what you've done since 9/11 that, can't be disputed. But during our time frame, during my time frame, we were constantly basically establishing our bona fides, it seemed like. And, I think Coach's book, No Room for Error, is a pretty great title, because every time we were getting ready to go on mish, Coach always reminded us you're only as good as your last mish.
That is
there is no
true.
room. Yeah. And so, we constantly, from that always stuck in our mind. That always was something that going out the door, you're going through your mental gymnastics, you're double checking your equipment, you're gearing your mental game up, for lack of term, because, you didn't want to face Coach Carney, if you, screwed the pooch,
Wrath.
that tough old Irishman. Yeah, I don't.
But I think
don't meet him in the dark alley. But that's the boom. And again, we can talk about Desert One some more. There was some unique events in there, but I know we've been going for almost an hour. But even after that stuff, and we went through the rehearsals, and I guess I'll throw this in on Desert One, and retract. We never, we, and I say we, CCT, never had a full dress rehearsal. And I don't think that the whole thing was, we never went from A to Z. Again, I don't know when we were trained doing JRTXs with the Rangers, you had a day rehearsal, you had a night rehearsal with each of the companies, and eventually you had a battalion op, and by that time you kind of worked out of the bugs and stuff. But none of that, from what I call the air operation side, that we ever brought that all together. And in fact, here's a prime example. Mitch Bryan and I, this is another rehearsal of possible tactics to get the job done. As we go up, and I think it was B Squadron at Delta, we link up with B Squadron, boom, and we jump in. We fly from Fort Bragg all the way out to Yuma, out there at that drop zone, and we drop in, motorcycles and mules, and I think some Jeeps. And so we're doing, did an airdrop out in the middle of the desert, and then we're doing land nav across, the desert at night with, mules and motorcycles, et cetera. Boom. And so after the drop, we I don't know how many hours we were, fighting the desert and getting from point A to point B, and then we found a place that we held up. It was coming to light, so we, camouflaged up and pulled out camo nets, and basically stay there until night came. And so we're just bedding down, and all of a sudden we get this Huey helicopter flying in the area, flying around, and I think at the time it was probably Barswell, I think, was like the Sabre squadron commander, or squad member, or whatever. He finally made a decision. Hey, let's break cover here and step out, see what the hell's going on. So did that. Helicopter lands, and I think it was Barswell and his sergeant major, went up, and basically got directions from whoever was on the helicopter that need to get back to Yuma airfield and get back to Fort Bragg. And, so, we figured out the fastest route from where we're at back to the airfield, and loaded up on 141s and flew back to, good old, Yell Ramp at Fort Bragg. Of course, Mitch and I, we had to drive from Fort Bragg back to Charleston. So we get in the boom, and it was about 4 or 5 hour drive. We get back, and I think the coach was there to meet us and said, okay, go get yourself squared away. We're going to go. It's a go. So that's when we found out the mission was a go. And we were out doing cross country or overland navigations as a new tactic for the force to go into Iran. And I think at the same time, John and Dick West were doing a practice airfield seizure at Indian Springs. And so all kinds of moving parts. And so when we finally, we climb on a 141, Delta promised us a motorcycle. So that showed up on the 141 that picked us up, I think flew us to Rhine Mine. And then we got flown to Watakini, Egypt. And again, we're still trying to piece everything together, if you know what I mean. Nobody just said, hand your playbook. So we get into Watakini, we're in the tents there. And of course, a month prior, the coach had basically been chosen or recommended by Colonel Beckworth that, Colonel Beckworth wanted eyes on this, lake bed that all the intel folks had decided would be sufficient to land C-130s on. And so, I don't know if you guys know that story, but, Coach Carney, is sitting in a meeting, all of a sudden he's the chosen one to be flown into Iran by the agency.
Yep.
And to implant, the Boxing 1. And Boxing 1 was the project that we had been working off and on with what I call the agency geek guys that developed a transponder and these what I call the old beanbag lights, with pop-up antennas that could be activated, I think, for 10 miles out. And we had worked back and forth, on different things down at Fort Stewart between all the other things that we're doing. And so those things passed mustard. I can't recall who did the final test with them with the 130 and the transponder. I think it was Pete Holt. I'm not sure in material, but got that done. So coach got chosen, and here's your four beanbag lights to put the Boxing 1 together. And so, what they do is they take them out of the Air Force.
Jeez.
He's not in the Air Force any longer. He's just Joe Civilian.
Jeez. It's
and so he follows the instructions. He's got a new name. They gave him a alias, and you have to have him on the interview to tell the story. He forgot about his alias, when he was checking in to one of the hotels overseas.
That's not good.
It's all, and the guy, and here's the classic. This is kind of, it's a small world. One of the primary pilots was one of the Air American pilots that I, always hitched a ride with down in Vincent. If I remember, told you, when we didn't stay up country, we always flew back with Air America or the Ravens or whoever and catch a ride. Well, one of the first pilots I flew with, going up in Longchamp was a guy named Jim Ryan, and he, hell of a pilot, and he had lost a portion of his leg, in operation. So, they'd say he was had a wooden leg, and so he ended up being one of the primary pilots of the Otter that took, Coach Carney into the desert. So you talk about a small world.
Yeah, no kidding.
The guy, hell of a pilot. And I remember the first flight I had going up to Longchamp. He had a bunch of rice and beans and bullets and stuff that he had to deliver to a hilltop. And of course, we're flying up as me and Charlie Day and all the rice and beans and bullets. And, we're sitting on that and we're going into this cloud bank. And you can't see diddly. But this guy had been flying this area, time and distance, whatever. And all of a sudden, again, I'm driving, yes, but this is the kind of pilot this guy was. He's, starts circling around and we start descending, and we're still in the clouds. We're just kind of, circling around and around, and all of a sudden, here's this postage stamp of an LZ on this hilltop, just boom, and his last turn, boom, comes down, and just boom, sets the airplane down, right out of this cloud bag. I'm sitting there, geez, and they don't have all this high-speed navigation shit. This is just flying by the seat of your pants, and I said, holy Christ, you talk about having a pucker factor. Our first flight on a twin, or not a Twin Otter, but a Porter. Yeah. I like the Charlie says, yeah, welcome to Laos. Welcome to Air America.
Chief, that is insane. Well, I'm because we're at an hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. Obviously, we're not done yet because your career is unreal, and I'm like, I've been taking notes the entire time, like I did last time, and I just going through. We've talked for an hour, and you've gone through, the Ford Air Guide School, talking about the stuff with MACTHAI, with General Adderholt, landing O1s on soccer fields, unloading people, evacuating F5s on highways, CDS bundle recovery, re-rigging. And then you start going into the beginning of Brand X and dive school, and then Coach Carney. And we haven't even gotten into Operational Eagle Claw or anything like that. So, as always, we definitely want to invite you back, and hopefully we don't make it as long between, sit downs. But I definitely want to say thank you, and we really appreciate you coming on. And again, you, Coach Carney, any of these folks are always invited back on. We really appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and schedule you after this, after we're done recording, and try and get you scheduled and locked down for a part 3, if you will. So definitely appreciate you joining us, and everybody out there. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.